Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's special edition of our daily UPSC CSE lecture series. I am delighted to have you all in this virtual classroom as we analyze the Hindu editorial dated 13th July 2026. My dear students, this is not just another current affairs session. What I am about to share with you represents a comprehensive breakdown that connects today's news directly with your UPSC syllabus, helping you build that analytical mindset that the examiners reward in the final examination. So, what are we covering today? We have 5 interconnected high-priority topics spanning multiple general studies papers. First, we will examine India's crude oil strategy and the historic surge in Russian oil imports despite premium pricing. Second, we will explore the national biofuel policy and the E20 ethanol blending program with its socio-environmental trade-offs. Third, we will analyze the Strait of Hormuz crisis and its transmission to India's economy through currency depreciation and stock market volatility. Fourth, we will discuss judicial reforms addressing the massive 5 crore pending cases burden. And finally, we will look at India's West Asia policy and the strategic hedging required in an increasingly volatile region. Each topic has been selected because it carries significant examination value. Stay with me throughout, and I promise you will leave with clarity, structured knowledge, and the confidence to tackle any question UPSC throws at you. Let us begin this learning journey together. Topic 1. Crude oil strategy. Crude oil strategy, why in news? Now, let us begin with a topic that affects every Indian household through fuel prices, inflation, and economic stability, India's crude oil strategy. Why is crude oil strategy in the news right now? 3 critical developments demand our attention. According to Ministry of Commerce data, Russia's share in India's crude oil imports has surged above 40% in May 2026, marking a 2-year high in our sourcing from Moscow. Here is what makes this particularly interesting. In a major shift from the earlier discount regime, Indian refiners paid a premium of $46 per ton, which translates to $916 per ton, for Russian oil compared to other sources during May. This is significant because Russian crude was historically available at substantial discounts following the Ukraine conflict. The premium pricing indicates tightening global supply conditions and changing market dynamics. The fiscal burden has escalated substantially. Higher global prices drove India's May 2026 oil import bill up by 23.5% over April, reaching a total of $13.7 billion. This represents a significant outflow of foreign exchange and puts pressure on the current account deficit. For UPSC, this topic sits at the intersection of GS Paper 2 International Relations and GS Paper 3 Economy, testing your understanding of how geopolitics directly translates into economic outcomes. Can UPSC ask a question on this? Absolutely yes. Let us understand the structural backdrop of India's crude import profile. India's crude import profile. To understand the contemporary developments, you must appreciate the structural context of India's crude oil dependency. India's dependence on imported crude oil has crossed a staggering 90% in 2025-26, rising dramatically from 54.9% in 1998-99. This represents one of the highest import dependencies among major economies and makes India extremely vulnerable to global price shocks and supply disruptions. The domestic production story is equally concerning. Domestic crude production has continuously declined, dropping to 26 MMT, million metric tons, from a historic peak of 35.9 MMT in 2011-12. This decline reflects aging oil fields, limited new discoveries, inadequate investment in exploration, and the challenges of extracting from geologically complex terrains. Meanwhile, domestic consumption of petroleum products has grown from 90.6 MMT in 1998 to 99 to 243 to MMT in 2025 to 26, creating a widening gap between demand and domestic supply. The supply concentration reveals that while Russia commands a dominant 40.5% share, traditional Middle Eastern partners, including Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, along with emerging sources like the USA and West Africa, continue to play important roles. This is your key data point for prelims. Remember the 90% import dependency, the decline from 1935. 9 to 26 MMT in domestic production, and the consumption growth from 90.6 to 243.2 MMT. These figures tell the story of India's energy vulnerability. The geopolitics of global oil. Now, let us understand the geopolitical forces that have reshaped global oil markets. Three major factors deserve your attention for comprehensive analysis. First, sanctions and trade redirection. Western sanctions and the G7 price cap redirected Russian Urals crude from Europe to Asia, prompting India to rapidly scale up discount-driven imports since 2022. Initially, this worked in India's favor as Russian crude was available at significant discounts. However, as global supply has tightened, those discounts have evaporated and transformed into premiums. Second, alternate payment systems. Choked SWIFT pipelines forced India and Russia to explore non-dollar settlement mechanisms, utilizing rupee-ruble arrangements and UAE dirhams. This represents a significant evolution in international payments architecture and demonstrates how sanctions can accelerate de-dollarization trends. Third, OPEC Plus supply controls. Production cuts orchestrated by the OPEC Plus alliance keep global supply constrained, leaving net importing nations highly vulnerable to pricing shocks. OPEC Plus decisions to cut production directly impact crude prices and consequently India's import bill. For mains, you can connect these factors to demonstrate how geopolitics, sanctions architecture, payment systems, and producer cartel decisions collectively determine the energy security calculus for import-dependent nations like India. India's energy security hedging. Given these vulnerabilities, India has adopted a multi-pronged hedging strategy. With 90% import dependency and a sourcing basket now expanded to 41 countries, India has significantly diversified its crude supply sources. This expansion from the earlier 27 nations to 41 distinct partners includes restoring imports from Venezuela, which had been sanctioned earlier. The second pillar involves strategic petroleum reserves. Underground rock caverns in Vishakhapatnam, Mangaluru, and Padur provide emergency storage that can shield India from short-term supply disruptions. These SPRs function as physical buffers against sudden price spikes or supply interruptions, buying time for the government to arrange alternative supplies. The third strategy focuses on enhancing refining yields. Leveraging India's massive domestic refining capacity allows us to process diverse crude grades efficiently, maximizing output from every barrel imported. India has emerged as a refining hub, and this capability provides additional flexibility in crude sourcing decisions. For your mains preparation, remember the number 41, the count of countries in India's crude sourcing basket. This diversification is itself a strategic achievement that reduces dependency on any single supplier or region. Think about it, if India can source from 41 different countries, no single disruption can paralyze our energy supply. This is the essence of sovereign hedging through diversification. Sovereign roadmap to resilience. Now, let us examine the specific challenges and required interventions for building long-term resilience. premium pricing pressure has emerged as a critical challenge. The Russian discount has evaporated, transforming into a premium of $46 per ton in May 2026. The required strategic intervention is to renegotiate long-term, fixed-price supply contracts with alternative suppliers, locking in favorable terms before prices rise further. Hormuz transit volatility represents another major concern. Heavy reliance on shipping lanes transiting through the volatile Strait of Hormuz exposes India to potential blockades or attacks. The strategic response should prioritize imports from non-Hormuz sources, including West Africa, Latin America, and the USA, diversifying not just by country but also by transit route. Declining domestic output requires attention to upstream policy. Aging fields and low investment are crimping domestic exploration and production. The intervention needed is to provide fiscal incentives for advanced seismic exploration, data acquisition, and enhanced oil recovery (EOR) techniques that can extract more from existing fields. For prelims, remember EOR, as it represents the technological frontier for maximizing domestic production. For mains, you can frame these three challenges as interconnected dimensions of energy security that require coordinated policy responses across diplomatic, commercial, and technological domains. UPSC Integration, Crude Strategy. Now, let us consolidate this topic with a prelims practice question. Consider the following statements regarding India's strategic petroleum reserves. Statement 1 says cavern storage facilities are currently operational at Padur, Mangaluru, and Chandikhol. Statement 2 says they are managed by the Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserves Limited, ISPRL. Which statements are correct? The answer is option B, 2 only. While ISPRL does manage the strategic petroleum reserves, Chandikhol is currently under Phase 2 as a proposed facility, not operational. The currently operational facilities are Visakhapatnam, Mangaluru, and Padur, all from Phase I. This is a crucial distinction that UPSC tests repeatedly. For mains, the answer framework should include an introduction quoting the 90% dependency rate and recent shifts in Russian crude premiums to establish the contemporary context. The first body paragraph should detail the strategic risks, including Strait of Hormuz vulnerability and payment choke points that swift restrictions create. The second body paragraph should evaluate India's diversification strategy, covering sourcing from 41 countries, strategic petroleum reserves, and biofuels development. The conclusion should focus on the transition to alternative energy sources, including nuclear power and green hydrogen, as the long-term path to energy security and reduced import dependency. This structure will help you craft comprehensive answers that score well. Topic 2. Ethanol blending and biofuels. Ethanol blending, why in news? Shifting gears now to biofuels, a topic that sits at the intersection of energy security, agricultural policy, and environmental sustainability. The ethanol blending program is in the news because the Ministry of Petroleum has admitted, in a newly issued FAQ, that E20 fuel could result in a 3 to 5% reduction in vehicle fuel economy. This admission is significant because it acknowledges a trade-off that the government had previously been reluctant to discuss publicly. Production cost pressures represent another dimension. Due to the government's high procurement prices to support farmers, E20 fuel could face upward cost pressures, with actual details depending on crude prices. The government is paying premium prices for ethanol to ensure farmer incomes are protected, but this creates fiscal challenges. Despite these challenges, the government has mounted sovereign defenses of the program. The 20% blending target minimizes crude import bills, offering a shield from global energy choke points and currency volatility. The strategic logic is that even if E20 is slightly more expensive domestically, it reduces our exposure to international price shocks and saves foreign exchange. For UPSC, this topic spans GS Paper 3 Economy and Environment, and it tests your ability to analyze policy trade-offs honestly. Can UPSC ask about the fuel versus food debate? Absolutely. Understanding these competing considerations is essential for mains answers on energy policy. National Biofuel Policy and E20. Let us examine the policy framework that drives India's ethanol blending program. The national policy on biofuels target of achieving 20% ethanol blending in petrol was advanced to 2025-26, driving a massive scaling up of domestic distillery capacity across the country. This aggressive timeline required significant infrastructure investment and supply chain development. The policy permits ethanol production from multiple feedstocks, including sugarcane juice, B-heavy molasses, damaged food grains, MAJ, and surplus rice from the Food Corporation of India. This feedstock diversification is important because it allows the program to adapt to agricultural conditions and food security considerations in different regions. Biofuels are categorized into 3 generations based on feedstock and technology. First generation, 1G. Biofuels use sugar and starch-based feedstocks like sugarcane and corn. Second generation, 2G, biofuels use lignocellulosic biomass, including agricultural waste and crop residues. Third generation, 3G, biofuels are algae-based, representing the technological frontier with no arable land requirement. For your prelims preparation, remember the 3 generations of biofuels, 1G for food crops, 2G for agricultural waste, and 3G for algae. This classification frequently appears in UPSC questions. For mains, you can discuss how India is gradually transitioning from 1G to 2G and 3G to address the food versus fuel conflict. The socio-environmental dividends. Now, let us examine the benefits that the ethanol blending program delivers. The key structural advantage relates to combustion chemistry. Ethanol contains oxygen molecules that promote more complete combustion of the fuel mixture, resulting in cleaner emissions and better engine performance in compatible vehicles. The carbon abatement potential is substantial. Blending substantially reduces life cycle carbon emissions by around 40% compared to unblended petrol. This makes ethanol blending a significant tool for climate change mitigation, aligning India's transportation sector with our Paris Agreement commitments and net zero aspirations. The farmer's income cushion is equally important. Fixed procurement prices, such as 71.86 rupees per litre for MAJ-based ethanol, provide a secure, alternative income stream to rural households. This represents a major rural development opportunity, creating new market demand for agricultural produce and price stability for farmers. For your mains answers, the 40% life cycle carbon reduction figure is a powerful data point that demonstrates the environmental benefits. Combine this with the farmer income support narrative, and you have a compelling case for why ethanol blending represents a triple win: energy security, environmental sustainability, and rural development. UPSC appreciates candidates who can articulate multidimensional benefits while acknowledging genuine trade-offs. The food versus fuel conflict. Now, let us honestly address the challenges and criticisms. The food versus fuel conflict is the most fundamental challenge. Diverting agricultural land and crops, particularly MAJ and sugarcane, from food to fuel production risks inflating food prices. When farmers choose to grow crops for ethanol rather than food, the supply of food crops decreases, potentially driving up prices for consumers. Water intensity is another serious concern. Sugarcane is highly water-intensive, depleting groundwater tables in rain-deficient areas like Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh. These are precisely the regions where water stress is most acute, and expanding sugarcane cultivation for ethanol production exacerbates existing water scarcity problems. Vehicle compatibility represents a third challenge. Using E20 fuel in older, non-compliant engines can cause physical damage, including corrosion to fuel systems and limp mode constraints where vehicles enter reduced power operation to protect the engine. The mitigation imperative is to mandate clear labeling at fuel stations and expand customer awareness about vehicle compatibility. For mains, the food versus fuel debate is a classic policy dilemma that UPSC loves to explore. You can frame this as a question of intergenerational equity, where current ethanol production decisions affect future food security. The way forward involves incentivizing water-efficient alternative crops and accelerating the transition to 2G and 3G biofuels that do not compete with food production. The 2G biofuel and circular path. Looking forward, the solution to the food versus fuel conflict lies in accelerating second-generation biofuel commercialization. We need to scale up 2G biorefineries, like the IOCL Panipat plant, that utilize agricultural waste such as rice straw, thereby reducing crop residue burning while producing clean fuel. This approach converts an environmental problem, stubble burning, into an energy opportunity. Promoting algal biofuels represents the next frontier. Increased research and development allocations for 3G algal-based biofuels, which require no arable land, can provide long-term solutions to the land use conflict. Algae can be grown in wastewater, on non-arable land, or in coastal areas, making it a truly sustainable feedstock. Implementing carbon offsets can also help. Aligning the national carbon market to incentivize biofuel investments, supporting rural community-led processing plants, would create economic incentives for 2G and 3G development. The circular bioeconomy approach transforms agricultural waste into valuable fuel, creating income streams for rural communities while addressing environmental challenges. For prelims, remember the IOCL Panipat 2G plant as a pioneering example of commercial-scale 2G ethanol production. This plant represents the template for scaling up 2G technology across India. UPSC Integration Biofuels. Now, let us consolidate the biofuels topic with a prelims practice question. According to the National Policy on Biofuels, which of the following can be used as feedstocks for ethanol production: cassava, damaged wheat grains, rotten potatoes, or sugar beet? The correct answer is option C, all of them, namely 1, 2, 3, and 4. The National Policy on Biofuels has been progressively amended to permit a wide range of feedstocks, including all these options. Cassava is a tuber crop that can be processed for ethanol. Damaged wheat grains that are unfit for human consumption provide an excellent feedstock without affecting food security. Similarly, rotten potatoes represent waste-to-wealth conversion. Sugar beet is a sugar-producing crop that can also serve as ethanol feedstock. This expansion of permitted feedstocks demonstrates the policy's flexibility in addressing food security concerns while promoting biofuel production. For mains, the answer framework should begin with an introduction defining the E20 blending mandate and noting the recent FAQ on mileage trade-offs. The first body paragraph should detail the socio-environmental benefits, including 40% carbon reduction and farmer price support mechanisms. The second body paragraph should analyze the core challenges, particularly the food versus fuel conflict and water use intensity concerns. The conclusion should suggest a policy transition toward 2G cellulosic and 3G algal-based biofuels that do not compete with food production. This analytical structure demonstrates both factual knowledge and policy sophistication. Topic 3. The Hormuz Crisis. The Hormuz crisis. Now, let us turn to a topic that has direct implications for India's economic stability and energy security. The Strait of Hormuz crisis represents one of the most significant geopolitical flashpoints affecting global energy markets. US President Donald Trump declared the West Asia ceasefire over after attacks on commercial tankers, followed by the targeting of 3 commercial tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. This represents a dramatic escalation that has roiled global energy markets. The US revoked its post-Move sanctions waivers on Iranian oil, launching targeted strikes on Iran's coastal monitoring stations. This demonstrates how quickly diplomatic agreements can unravel when geopolitical tensions escalate. Iran's AIJS retaliated with 85 strikes against US military bases in Kuwait and Bahrain, sending global Brent crude prices soaring past $77 per barrel. The cascade of military actions, sanctions reversals, and retaliatory strikes has created extreme uncertainty in global energy markets. For India, which imports the vast majority of its crude oil, this volatility translates directly into economic vulnerability. Think about it, every $10 increase in crude prices adds approximately $1.5 billion to India's annual import bill at current import levels. This is why Hormuz stability is not just a regional concern but a critical factor in Indian economic management. Geography of the strategic choke. To understand the significance of the Hormuz crisis, you must appreciate the geographical features that make this waterway so critical. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway separating the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, flanked by Iran to the north and Oman and the UAE to the south. This geographic position makes it the choke point between the oil-rich Gulf states and the open ocean. The global oil artery status is staggering. This is the world's most critical maritime choke point, facilitating the daily transit of over 21 million barrels, or 20% of global petroleum liquid consumption. When you think about global oil trade, 1 in every 5 barrels passes through this narrow waterway. Any disruption here has immediate and massive consequences for global energy markets. The transit channels are extremely constrained. The strait features 2-mile-wide shipping lanes in each direction, restricting commercial vessels to designated routes within Omani and Iranian territorial waters. This narrow geography means that even a single incident, whether an accident, a deliberate attack, or a naval confrontation, can effectively close the waterway to commercial traffic. For prelims, remember the 21 million barrels daily figure and the 20% share of global petroleum liquids. These numbers make the strategic importance of Hormuz absolutely clear. Chronology of strategic friction. Let us trace the chronology of this strategic friction to understand the rapid escalation sequence. On 28 February, Iran's supreme leader was assassinated, leading to immediate regional proxy conflict escalation. This was the trigger event that destabilized the entire region. By 17 June, the US and Iran had signed a preliminary 14-point memorandum of understanding in Geneva to halt hostilities, representing a diplomatic breakthrough. However, this proved temporary. On July 4 to 5, commercial tankers using Omani coast routes were attacked, and the US revoked oil waivers that had allowed Iranian oil exports. This was the first major breakdown of the ceasefire agreement. By 8 July, US air strikes hit Iranian coast targets, and the IRGC retaliated against US bases, effectively ending the ceasefire. This timeline demonstrates how rapidly situations can escalate from diplomacy to open conflict, with severe consequences for global energy markets. For mains, you can use this chronology to illustrate the fragility of diplomatic agreements in the context of deep-seated regional hostility and how quickly transport routes can become militarized. Economic transmission to India. Now, let us examine how this crisis transmits to the Indian economy through concrete financial indicators. The rupee value reached 95.48 against the US dollar, an all-time low that reflects the pressure on the Indian currency from rising import costs and risk-averse capital flows. Financial markets reacted sharply. Heightened geopolitical risk caused benchmark indices, including Nifty and Sensex, to fall over 2%, demonstrating how quickly investor sentiment can shift when energy security is threatened. Import inflation surges. Rising Brent crude prices directly inflate India's oil import bill, triggering domestic fuel price pressures. When global crude rises, Indian refiners face higher input costs, which eventually transmit to petrol, diesel, and LPG prices for consumers. This creates a cascade effect throughout the economy, increasing transportation costs, production costs, and ultimately consumer prices. For mains, the rupee at 95.48 against the dollar and the 2% market decline are powerful data points that demonstrate the immediate economic impact. The key analytical insight is that geopolitical events in West Asia transmit to India through multiple channels: direct crude price increases, currency depreciation, and financial market volatility. Understanding these transmission mechanisms is essential for answering questions on economic security and external sector management. India's foreign policy stance. India's response to the Hormuz crisis demonstrates the principles of strategic autonomy and sovereign hedging. The Ministry of External Affairs officially urged all parties to exercise restraint, return to dialogue, and protect global commerce, reflecting India's preference for diplomatic solutions while protecting economic interests. The strategic autonomy approach involves maintaining balanced relations and participating in the I-2 group, India, Israel, UAE, USA, while actively developing Iran's Chabahar port. This dehyphenated policy allows India to engage with multiple regional actors based on their own merits rather than being forced to choose sides. Sovereign hedging involves sourcing oil from non-Hormuz producers to protect energy supply lines from transit interruptions. This includes Venezuelan crude under US sanctions waivers, as well as expanded sourcing from West Africa, Latin America, and the USA. Operation Sankalp represents the military dimension of this response, with Indian Navy warships deployed to secure trade channels and provide safe escorts to Indian-flagged commercial vessels in the region. For your mains preparation, Operation Sankalp is a key example of how India uses naval power to protect economic interests without formal military alliances. This represents a model of strategic independence that UPSC appreciates. India's foreign policy stance. India's response to the Hormuz crisis demonstrates the principles of strategic autonomy and sovereign hedging. The Ministry of External Affairs officially urged all parties to exercise restraint, return to dialogue, and protect global commerce, reflecting India's preference for diplomatic solutions while protecting economic interests. The strategic autonomy approach involves maintaining balanced relations and participating in the I-2 group, India, Israel, UAE, USA, while actively developing Iran's Chabahar port. This dehyphenated policy allows India to engage with multiple regional actors based on their own merits rather than being forced to choose sides. Sovereign hedging involves sourcing oil from non-Hormuz producers to protect energy supply lines from transit interruptions. This includes Venezuelan crude under US sanctions waivers, as well as expanded sourcing from West Africa, Latin America, and the USA. Operation Sankalp represents the military dimension of this response, with Indian Navy warships deployed to secure trade channels and provide safe escorts to Indian-flagged commercial vessels in the region. For your mains preparation, Operation Sankalp is a key example of how India uses naval power to protect economic interests without formal military alliances. This represents a model of strategic independence that UPSC appreciates. Topic 4. Judicial Reforms. Judicial Reforms, why in news? Now, let us shift to an equally critical topic that affects the rule of law and access to justice in India. The judicial reforms discussion has gained urgency because the Supreme Court itself has observed that mounting pendency remains one of the greatest challenges to the justice delivery system. This is a remarkable admission from the highest court, acknowledging that the system is failing to deliver timely justice to millions of citizens. Justice P.S. Narasimha has questioned why backlog is seen almost exclusively as a judicial responsibility, calling on the bar to share accountability. This represents a paradigm shift in how we think about judicial reforms, from focusing solely on judges to recognizing the role of lawyers, administrative systems, and litigants themselves. The sovereign call for reform is significant. There is a proposed paradigm shift to make tackling pendency a collaborative mission of the bench and the bar. This collaborative approach recognizes that judicial reform is not just about appointing more judges but about systemic changes that involve all stakeholders in the justice delivery system. For the UPSC, this topic sits squarely in GS Paper 2 Polity and Governance, and it tests your understanding of constitutional provisions, institutional reforms, and the challenges of delivering justice in a complex democracy. Why is this important? Because justice delayed is justice denied, and the 5 crore pending cases represent real human suffering. Sovereign Judicial Architecture. Before we analyze the backlog crisis, let us refresh our understanding of the judicial architecture. The Supreme Court is the apex constitutional court established under Article 124, serving as the final interpreter of the Constitution and guardian of fundamental rights. It has original, appellate, and advisory jurisdiction. The High Courts are established under Article 214, exercising original, appellate, and supervisory jurisdiction over lower courts within state limits. Each state or group of states has a high court that serves as the highest judicial authority in that jurisdiction. The subordinate courts are governed by Articles 233 to 237, serving as the primary interface for citizens accessing the justice system. These include district courts, sessions courts, magistrate courts, and various specialized tribunals. For prelims, remember the article numbers: Article 124 for the Supreme Court, Article 214 for High Courts, and Articles 233 to 237 for subordinate courts. UPSC tests these foundational constitutional provisions repeatedly. Understanding the institutional architecture helps you appreciate where bottlenecks occur and what reforms are needed at each level. Analyzing the backlog crisis. Now, let us analyze the backlog crisis with concrete data. The cumulative pending cases in Indian courts exceed 5 crore, representing an enormous burden that delays justice for millions of litigants. Additionally, judicial vacancies exceed 20% across various courts, meaning that even existing sanctioned positions remain unfilled, limiting adjudication capacity. The core causes of pendency are interconnected. Judicial vacancies result from protracted delays in filling sanctioned posts across high courts and lower courts. The collegium system for appointing judges, while maintaining independence, has been criticized for its slow pace. Inadequate infrastructure compounds the problem. Lack of digital courtrooms, modern courtrooms, and administrative support hampers judicial productivity. Many courts still rely on manual processes that slow down case management. Frequent adjournments represent a procedural issue. Procedural loopholes permit repetitive adjournments, delaying the trial process. Lawyers often seek adjournments for tactical reasons, extending case timelines indefinitely. Government litigation is perhaps the most ironic cause. The state remains the single largest litigant, clogging court dockets with service matters, tax disputes, and contractual disagreements. Government departments frequently appeal adverse decisions up to the Supreme Court, creating massive backlogs. For mains, the 5 crore figure and 20% vacancy rate are powerful statistics that demonstrate the scale of the crisis. The court vacation debate. One specific reform debate centers on court vacations. The traditional system provides judges with substantial vacation periods, typically around 2 months in summer and shorter breaks throughout the year. This system has both supporters and critics who present compelling arguments. Those who support vacations argue that judges require time for research, writing complex judgments, and resting to prevent burnout. Writing judgments is intellectually demanding work that requires reflection and careful articulation. Administrative works like clearing old records and updating procedures are also completed during vacation periods. Urgent matters are still heard by dedicated vacation benches, ensuring access to justice even during vacation periods. However, those who argue for restructuring contend that prolonged, staggered vacations delay justice delivery, leaving under-trials in prison for extended periods. A rotation-based system can ensure courts remain operational year-round, with different judges taking vacations at different times. Additionally, vacation benches are too few to handle the volume of urgent applications that arise during vacation periods. For mains, this debate allows you to present a balanced view that acknowledges the genuine need for judicial rest while advocating for systemic improvements. The way forward likely involves a hybrid approach that reduces total vacation days while ensuring adequate rest through rotation systems. Sovereign Judicial Roadmap. Let us now examine the structural reforms needed to address the judicial backlog crisis. The first recommendation is to establish a national legal academy that mandates continuing legal education for advocates after enrollment to improve professional standards. This would ensure that lawyers maintain updated knowledge and professional competence throughout their careers. The second priority is to scale up the e-Courts project. Accelerating Phase 3 of the e-Courts initiative, integrating AI-driven scheduling and case management tools, can dramatically improve efficiency. Digital filing, virtual hearings, and AI-assisted case categorization can reduce administrative delays and improve judicial productivity. The third major reform is implementing the All India Judicial Service. Article 312 provides for a centralized, competitive examination to recruit talented judicial officers, similar to the civil services examination. This would create a uniform standard for judicial recruitment and help address the shortage of qualified judges in lower courts. The collaborative mission approach requires the bar to share responsibility with the bench. Implementing strict limits on adjournments can curb delaying tactics and expedite trials. This involves both judicial rulemaking and bar association cooperation. For prelims, remember Article 312 for the All India Judicial Service. This constitutional provision has been discussed for decades but never implemented, representing one of the pending reforms in Indian judicial governance. UPSC Integration Judicial Reforms. Now, let us consolidate the judicial reforms topic with a prelims practice question that tests your understanding of the All India Judicial Service. Consider the following statements. Statement 1 says the creation of AIJS requires a resolution passed by the Rajya Sabha supported by not less than 2/3 of the members present and voting. Statement 2 says it is provided for under Article 312 of the Constitution. Which statements are correct? The answer is option C, both 1 and 2. Both statements are factually correct. Article 312 of the Constitution indeed provides for the creation of an all-India judicial service, and its creation requires a resolution by the Rajya Sabha supported by not less than two-thirds of the members present and voting. This is similar to the procedure for creating all-India services like the IAS and IPS. UPSC frequently tests this procedural requirement, so remember that the Rajya Sabha, not the Lok Sabha, initiates the resolution for AIJS creation. For mains, the answer framework should begin with an introduction quoting the 5 crore pendency figure and the recent Supreme Court observations on bar accountability, establishing the contemporary relevance of judicial reform discussions. The first body paragraph should identify the core causes, including judicial vacancies exceeding 20%, infrastructural bottlenecks in courts, frequent adjournments that delay trials, and government litigation that clogs dockets with service matters and tax disputes. The second body paragraph should propose structural reforms covering the establishment of the All India Judicial Service under Article 312 to recruit talented judicial officers, the acceleration of e-courts Phase 3 with AI-driven case management, and the restructuring of court vacations through rotation systems. The conclusion should emphasize the constitutional mandate of speedy trial under Article 21, connecting judicial reform to fundamental rights protection, and the basic structure doctrine that demands effective access to justice for all citizens. This analytical structure demonstrates both factual knowledge of constitutional provisions and practical understanding of how institutional reforms can address systemic challenges. Now, let us transition to our next major topic on the anti-drug campaign and internal security challenges. Topic 5: Anti-drug campaign. Anti-drug campaign, why in news? Now, let us turn to a critical internal security topic that affects every community in India. Southern states including Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana have agreed to set up a permanent, joint anti-drug coordination unit. This represents a significant step in recognizing that drug trafficking is a transboundary problem requiring interstate cooperation rather than isolated state-level responses. The campaign targets new methods adopted by drug traffickers, including dark web transactions, cryptocurrency payments, and food delivery channels. These evolving tactics have made traditional law enforcement approaches less effective, requiring new strategies and technologies to combat modern drug networks that exploit digital platforms. Operation Tufan, initiated by Kerala's Home Minister, represents a regional crackdown against prescription drug diversion. This operation specifically targets the misuse of pharmaceutical drugs, which has become a major component of the drug abuse problem in many states, particularly affecting youth populations. For UPSC, this topic spans GS Paper 3 Internal Security and connects to broader themes of law enforcement coordination, technology adoption by criminals, and public health responses to substance abuse. Why is this important? Drug trafficking funds organized crime, supports terrorism through the narco-terror nexus, and destroys families and communities across the country. The geopolitical transit matrix. To understand India's drug challenge, you must appreciate the country's geographic vulnerability. India is sandwiched between two major global illicit drug production hubs, turning the country into a transit zone and a target market. This geographic position is both a structural disadvantage and a defining feature of our internal security landscape. The Golden Crescent lies to the west, comprising Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, which serves as a major source of illicit opiates, including heroin and opium derivatives. The Golden Triangle lies to the east, flanked by Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand, facilitating the inflow of synthetic drugs and methamphetamines. These two production zones create a geographic squeeze on India from both sides. Maritime sourcing has increased significantly, with drug smuggling via maritime routes in the Indian Ocean bypassing standard land border security. Drug traffickers use small boats, fishing vessels, and even container ships to move their products, exploiting the vastness of India's 7,500-kilometer coastline and the limitations of maritime patrol capabilities. For mains, the Golden Crescent and Golden Triangle are essential concepts that the UPSC tests in both prelims and mains. Understanding India's geographic vulnerability helps explain why drug trafficking remains a persistent challenge despite extensive law enforcement efforts and why international cooperation through AIJS and bilateral agreements is essential. Statutory and institutional frame. The legal framework for India's anti-drug efforts rests on the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985, commonly known as the NDPS Act. This provides the primary statutory framework to prohibit and regulate operations relating to narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances, with strict bail standards that make it difficult for accused persons to secure release pending trial. The Narcotics Control Bureau is the apex national coordinating agency empowered to liaise with state police forces and international bodies, including the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, AIJS, and the International Narcotics Control Board, INCB, to combat trafficking. The NCB coordinates operations, shares intelligence, and represents India in international drug control forums. Multi-agency coordination is facilitated through the NCORD, Narcotics Coordination Secretariat portal, which enables real-time intelligence exchange among state and central agencies. This digital platform represents a significant technological upgrade in how anti-drug agencies share information and coordinate operations across jurisdictions. For prelims, remember that the NDPS Act of 1985 is the primary legislation, and the NCB was constituted by a government notification in 1986 under Section 4(3) of the NDPS Act. This distinction between statutory and executive creation is important for answering questions accurately. Emerging vectors of trafficking. The challenges facing anti-drug agencies are constantly evolving. The darknet marketplace represents a significant new vector, with difficulties in tracking encrypted communications and decentralized transactions on darknet drug bazaars. Traditional surveillance methods that rely on intercepting phone calls and monitoring financial transactions through banks are largely ineffective against these encrypted platforms. Synthetic drug proliferation has transformed the trafficking landscape. The rise of low-volume, high-value synthetic drugs like fentanyl and methamphetamine means that small packages can carry enormous value, making detection harder and profits higher. These drugs are easily concealed and synthesized from precursor chemicals that are difficult to track through international supply chains. The narcoterror nexus represents perhaps the most concerning development. Illicit drug proceeds are being diverted to fund anti-national activities and cross-border insurgencies. This linkage between drug trafficking and terrorism creates a compound security threat that requires coordinated responses from law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and financial regulators. For mains, the darknet and cryptocurrency dimensions represent the frontier of drug trafficking challenges. You can connect these to broader themes of cybersecurity, financial regulation, and the evolving nature of transnational organized crime. The four-tier intelligence sharing structure and the NCORD portal represent India's institutional response to these challenges. National response and mitigation. The government has launched several initiatives to address the drug trafficking challenge. The Nasha Mukta Bharat campaign is a comprehensive effort to raise public awareness and reduce drug demand in vulnerable districts. It combines community participation with healthcare interventions to address both supply and demand dimensions of the drug problem. The SIMS portal, or Seizure Information Management System, digitizes and logs drug seizure metadata. This enables the creation of a centralized database to analyze and map trafficking trends, helping agencies identify patterns and allocate resources more effectively. Joint task forces coordinate state-level anti-drug operations, combating the misuse of logistics networks, including couriers and delivery apps, by traffickers. These task forces represent the interstate cooperation that is essential for addressing trafficking networks that deliberately operate across jurisdictional boundaries. For mains, the multi-pronged approach combining law enforcement, demand reduction, and international cooperation represents best practices in addressing drug trafficking. You can frame this as a comprehensive strategy that addresses both supply and demand while building institutional capacity for sustained action. UPSC Integration Anti-Drug. Now, let us consolidate the anti-drug topic with a prelims practice question. Consider the following statements regarding the Narcotics Control Bureau. Statement 1 says it is a statutory body constituted under the NDPS Act 1985. Statement 2 says it functions under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Which statements are correct? The answer is option B, 2 only. While the NCB does function under the Ministry of Home Affairs, it was not constituted directly as a statutory body under the NDPS Act. Instead, the NCB was constituted by a government notification in 1986 under Section 4(3) of the NDPS Act, making it an executive creation rather than a statutory body. This distinction is important and frequently tested by UPSC. For mains, the answer framework should begin with an introduction highlighting India's geographic location between the Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle, establishing why India is both a transit zone and target market. The first body paragraph should detail emerging challenges, including darknet markets, synthetic drug smuggling, and narcoterror links that complicate traditional law enforcement. The second body paragraph should evaluate the institutional defenses, including the NCB, the Code portal, and joint state coordination mechanisms. The conclusion should suggest a multi-pronged approach covering upgrading cyber forensics capabilities, expanding demand reduction drives, and strengthening international cooperation through a NORC and bilateral agreements. Topic 6. Energy Security. Slide 32. Energy Security, why in news? Now, let us examine the broader energy security picture. Rocket attacks on Qatari LNG vessels, such as the Al Raqayyat, in the Strait of Hormuz highlight the fragility of maritime energy transit. These attacks demonstrate that energy infrastructure itself is becoming a target in modern conflicts, adding another layer of vulnerability to import-dependent nations. The fiscal vulnerability is substantial. Prolonged maritime blockades or freight spikes directly inflate India's energy import costs, creating fiscal stress and macroeconomic instability. When shipping insurance premiums rise due to conflict risks, these costs are passed on to importers, ultimately affecting consumers through higher fuel prices. The strategic response involves escalating the expansion of domestic strategic petroleum reserves to build a robust buffer against supply disruptions. The SPRs function as physical insurance against both price spikes and supply interruptions, buying time for the government to arrange alternative supplies through diplomatic and commercial channels. For UPSC, this topic connects to multiple GS Paper 3 themes, including economic development, infrastructure, internal security, and environmental sustainability. Understanding the interconnections between energy security, economic stability, and geopolitical developments is essential for comprehensive mains answers. India's strategic petroleum caverns. Let us examine the specific infrastructure that India has developed. Visakhapatnam has a 1.33 MMT Phasai subterranean cavern facility located along the eastern coast, securing regional coastal refineries from supply disruptions. This facility can store crude oil in underground rock caverns that are secure from both natural disasters and military attacks. Mangaluru has a 150 MMT phase-I cavern storage facility along the western coast, protecting the supply lines of strategic refineries in that region. The western coast location provides alternative supply routes, reducing dependence on any single coastal region. Padur has a 1.50 MMT cavern completed in Phase I. Phase II plans add 6.5 MMT storage capacity in Padur and Chandikhol. This expansion would significantly increase India's strategic reserves capacity, moving closer to international benchmarks for emergency oil stocks. For prelims, remember the three Phase I locations: Vishakhapatnam 1.33 MMT, Mangaluru 1.50 MMT, and Padur 1.50 MMT. Phase 2 is a proposed expansion that includes Chandikhol. The total Phase I capacity is approximately 5.33 MMT, while Phase 2 will add 6.5 MMT more. Sovereign diversification goals. Beyond physical reserves, India is pursuing comprehensive energy diversification. The 500 gigawatts renewable energy target by 2030 represents an ambitious commitment to transitioning away from fossil fuel dependence. Aggressive capacity building in solar, wind, and hybrid projects will reduce our dependence on imported fuels while also addressing climate change concerns. The gas-based economy shift involves upgrading LNG terminal capacity to increase the share of natural gas in the primary energy mix from the current 6% to 15%. Natural gas is a cleaner fuel than coal or oil, and increasing its share in the energy mix will help reduce emissions while still providing reliable energy supply. The National Green Hydrogen Mission aims to build domestic green hydrogen production capacity to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors like steel, cement, and heavy transportation. Green hydrogen, produced using renewable electricity, represents the long-term pathway to a zero-carbon energy economy. For mains, the 500 gigawatts renewable target and 15% gas share are important policy commitments that demonstrate India's energy transition strategy. These targets connect to international climate commitments and represent significant economic opportunities in renewable energy manufacturing and deployment. Strategic hurdles and vulnerabilities. Several challenges must be addressed for energy security. Inadequate cavern capacity remains a concern, as India's existing SPR capacity of approximately 5.33 MMT provides only about 9.5 days of consumption, which lags behind the IEA mandate of 90 days. The required intervention is to expedite Phase 2 commercial cavern development through PPP models, leveraging both public investment and private sector efficiency. Import volatility exposure for renewable energy components is another challenge. High dependence on imports for solar modules and lithium-ion batteries creates new vulnerabilities even as we reduce fossil fuel dependence. The policy response should strengthen domestic manufacturing through production-linked incentive (PLI) schemes that support solar cells, modules, and battery production. Grid integration issues arise from the variable nature of renewable energy. A high input of intermittent renewable energy can affect grid stability, requiring the deployment of battery energy storage systems (BESS) to stabilize grid operations. Storage technologies are essential for managing the variability of solar and wind power. For mains, the 9.5 days versus 90 days comparison is a powerful statistic that demonstrates the gap between India's current reserves and international best practices. The PLI scheme for domestic manufacturing is an important policy tool that UPSC frequently references. The Energy Transition Roadmap. Securing India's energy future requires a twin-track approach: expanding physical crude reserves to manage short-term supply cuts while accelerating the transition to clean energy. This strategic hedging recognizes that while fossil fuels will remain important in the near term, the long-term future belongs to renewable energy and clean technologies. Key policy pathways include leasing cavern capacity, which involves collaborating with global oil suppliers like ADNOC to lease SPR storage and sharing infrastructure costs. This approach allows India to expand its effective reserves without bearing the full capital cost of construction. Expanding offshore exploration through simplifying the Open Acreage Licensing Program (OALP) can attract private investment in offshore exploration, potentially increasing domestic production over the long term. Deepening nuclear capacity by accelerating the construction of indigenous pressurized heavy water reactors (PHWRs) adds another dimension to the clean energy mix, providing reliable baseload power without carbon emissions. For mains, the twin-track approach demonstrates the sophisticated policy thinking required to manage energy transitions while maintaining security. You can frame this as a bridge strategy that addresses immediate vulnerabilities while building toward a sustainable future. UPSC Integration Energy Security. Let us consolidate the energy security topic with a prelims practice question. Consider the following statements regarding the National Green Hydrogen Mission. Statement 1 says it aims to develop green hydrogen production capacity of at least 5 MMT per annum by 2030. Statement 2 says it functions under the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. Which statements are correct? The answer is option C, both 1 and 2. The National Green Hydrogen Mission indeed targets a 5 MMT per annum production capacity by 2030, and it functions under the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, which is the nodal ministry for renewable energy development in India. For mains, the answer framework should begin with an introduction quoting the 90% import reliance and recent chokepoint escalations in West Asia. The first body paragraph should detail the existing physical cavern architecture covering Visakhapatnam, Mangaluru, and Padur facilities, along with capacity constraints. The second body paragraph should evaluate diversification strategies, including renewable energy targets, natural gas share increase, nuclear power expansion, and biofuels development. The conclusion should suggest a policy transition to a zero-emission, decentralized energy grid that combines multiple clean energy sources with smart grid technologies and storage systems. Topic 7. Biofuel feedstocks. Biofuel feedstocks, why in news? Let us return to the biofuels discussion to examine the feedstock dimension more carefully. To protect farmer margins, the government has set the procurement price for match-based ethanol at 71.86 rupees per litre, representing a premium that ensures farmers receive good returns for their crop while encouraging production. Sourcing transitions are underway to manage the shift from sugarcane-based to match and agricultural waste-based feedstocks. This transition helps protect groundwater tables in water-stressed regions like Maharashtra, where sugarcane cultivation has contributed to severe water depletion over decades. Resource audits are being implemented to ensure that feedstocks are sourced without inflating food grain prices. This involves monitoring the diversion of food crops to ethanol production and ensuring that food security priorities are maintained even as biofuel production scales up. For UPSC, this topic connects biofuel policy with agricultural policy, water resource management, and food security. Understanding these interconnections is essential for comprehensive mains answers on the food versus fuel debate. Categorization of feedstocks. The categorization of feedstocks is essential for understanding India's biofuel strategy. 1G. First generation. Feedstocks utilize food crops like sugarcane juice, molasses, madge, and surplus rice, which are highly efficient for ethanol production but compete with food resources. 2G, second generation, feedstocks process non-food cellulosic biomass, including rice straw, wheat straw, and bagasse, converting crop residues into fuel. This approach uses agricultural waste that would otherwise be burnt, causing pollution, or left to decompose. UCO, used cooking oil, involves diverting used cooking oil from kitchens to biodiesel plants, promoting circular economy principles and checking food adulteration. This feedstock addresses both waste management and biofuel production objectives. For prelims, remember the three categories: 1G for food crops, 2G for agricultural waste, and UCO for used cooking oil. Each represents a different policy approach with distinct sustainability implications. The transition from 1G to 2G is the key strategic direction for India's biofuel program. 2G biofuels and circular economy. The circular economy potential of 2G biofuels is significant. 2G technology converts low-value agricultural waste into high-value ethanol, helping reduce carbon emissions, boost rural incomes, and improve air quality by eliminating the need to burn crop residues. Cellulosic ethanol technology uses enzymatic hydrolysis, employing advanced biochemical processes to break down complex lignocellulosic structures into fermentable sugars. This technology unlocks the energy potential of agricultural waste that was previously difficult to process. Tackling stubble burning is a major environmental benefit. Sourcing paddy straw as feedstock directly addresses the environmental hazard of winter crop residue burning in northern India, which contributes significantly to air pollution in the national capital region. Sovereign incentives are provided under the PM-JIVAN Yojana to set up commercial 2G biorefineries. This viability gap funding supports the higher initial capital costs of 2G technology, encouraging private sector participation in this emerging sector. For mains, the circular bioeconomy approach represents a powerful framework for analyzing 2G biofuels. The conversion of agricultural waste into clean fuel addresses multiple objectives simultaneously: energy security, pollution reduction, and rural income generation. Resource sustainability issues. Despite the potential, 2G biofuels face significant challenges. High 2G capital cost is a major barrier, as setting up advanced 2G refineries requires massive upfront investments and complex enzymes, keeping production costs high. The economic viability depends on continued government support and technological improvements. Logistical fragmentation poses practical challenges. Collecting, baling, and transporting bulky crop residue from small, scattered farms is a major logistical challenge that adds to production costs and complicates supply chain management. The water footprint of continued reliance on 1G sugarcane-based ethanol depletes groundwater reserves in water-stressed agricultural belts like Maharashtra and parts of Uttar Pradesh. This environmental cost must be weighed against the energy security benefits. For mains, these challenges represent the practical implementation barriers that policy must address. The solution involves coordinated efforts across agricultural policy, industrial policy, and environmental policy to create an enabling environment for 2G biofuels. National Resource Programs. Several government programs support biofuel development. The PM-JIVAN Yojana provides viability gap funding for commercial 2G lignocellulosic ethanol projects, encouraging private sector investment in non-food competitive biofuel technology. The Sakat Initiative, or Sustainable Alternative Towards Affordable Transportation, targets compressed biogas from waste. This program promotes organic waste processing, producing clean fuel and biofertilizers as valuable byproducts. The RUCO initiative, or Repurpose Used Cooking Oil, targets the collection and conversion of used cooking oil to biodiesel. This prevents the re-entry of used cooking oil into the food chain, protecting public health while creating a new feedstock source. For prelims, remember these three programs: PMGVAN for 2G ethanol, SATAT for CBG, and RUCO for UCO-based biodiesel. These represent the policy framework supporting India's transition to sustainable biofuels. UPSC Integration, Feedstocks. Let us consolidate the feedstocks topic with a prelims practice question. Consider the following statements regarding the RUCO initiative. Statement 1 says it was launched by the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, FSSAI. Statement 2 says it aims to facilitate the conversion of used cooking oil into biodiesel. Which statements are correct? The answer is option C, both 1 and 2. FSSAI indeed launched the RUCO initiative, and its objective is precisely to facilitate the conversion of used cooking oil into biodiesel, thereby preventing its reuse in food preparation. For mains, the answer framework should begin with an introduction defining 2G biofuels and noting the limitations of food crop-based 1G ethanol. The first body paragraph should discuss the ecological benefits of 2G, including tackling stubble burning and saving water resources. The second body paragraph should detail the economic and technological challenges, including high capital costs and fragmented logistics. The conclusion should focus on the role of schemes like PMGVAN and SATAT in driving the transition to sustainable biofuels. Topic 8. West Asia Policy. West Asia Policy, why in news? Let us conclude our session by examining India's West Asia policy, which has become increasingly important given the region's volatility. Armed clashes between the US and Iran have placed India's West Asian relationships under significant pressure, requiring careful diplomatic management. India sent a high-level ministerial delegation to Tehran to maintain lines of communication and secure its interests in the region. This diplomatic engagement demonstrates India's commitment to maintaining relationships across the geopolitical divide, even when tensions escalate. Sovereign sourcing of crude oil from Venezuela under newly issued US waivers helps limit price volatility and reduces dependence on conflict-affected Gulf suppliers. This diversification strategy provides flexibility in managing energy security. For UPSC, this topic sits in GS paper to international relations and requires understanding of how India balances multiple relationships in a complex region. Why is this important? The Gulf region is critical for India's energy, diaspora, and remittance interests, requiring constant diplomatic attention. India's bilateral engagements. India maintains multiple strategic engagements in the West Asian region. Iran and Chabhar represent a critical relationship, with India developing the strategic Chabhar port to bypass land routes through Pakistan and secure trade channels with Central Asia and Europe. This 10-year contract represents a long-term commitment to regional connectivity. The I2U2 initiative involves collaboration with Israel, the UAE, and the USA to co-invest in critical infrastructure, clean energy, and food security corridors. This quadrilateral format represents a new model of regional cooperation that India participates in alongside its West Asian partners. GCC partnership focuses on strengthening economic and strategic ties with the Gulf Cooperation Council, securing trade, energy supplies, and diaspora well-being. The GCC relationship is India's most important regional partnership in economic terms, given the volume of trade, investment, and people-to-people connections. For mains, the dehyphenated policy framework allows India to maintain relationships with Iran and Israel simultaneously, despite their rivalry. This requires careful diplomatic calibration that UPSC appreciates as evidence of strategic maturity. India's strategic interests. India's strategic interests in West Asia are substantial. Over 8.5 million Indians live in Gulf countries, representing a massive diaspora whose safety and welfare are paramount concerns. These expatriates send home more than $40 billion annually in remittances, supporting families and contributing to India's foreign exchange reserves. Energy security is perhaps the most critical interest. Over 60% of India's crude imports and 85% of its LNG imports originate from Gulf countries. This dependency makes regional stability essential for Indian economic functioning. Maritime transit through critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb is essential for India's trade security. Any disruption to these waterways has immediate consequences for Indian commerce and energy supply. For mains, the 8.5 million strong diaspora, $40 billion remittances, and 60 to 85% energy import dependence are powerful statistics that demonstrate why West Asia policy is so important for India. These figures should be integrated into any mains answer on India's foreign policy. Geopolitical friction and challenges. Several friction points complicate India's West Asia policy. The Israel-Iran conflict puts Indian trade, diaspora, and energy supply lines at risk, requiring a balanced, dehyphenated foreign policy that avoids formal alignments with either side. The IMEC corridor, or India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, has been stalled due to regional instability. This ambitious project connecting India to Europe through the Middle East requires peaceful conditions for implementation. India should focus on alternative routes such as the International North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC, that bypass volatile regions. Strait of Hormuz volatility poses ongoing threats of prolonged transit blockades affecting oil and LNG supplies. India should coordinate and deploy naval escorts to protect commercial vessels, as demonstrated through Operation Sankalp. For mains, the dehyphenated policy is a key concept that demonstrates India's strategic independence. The ability to maintain relationships with rival powers while protecting national interests is a sophisticated foreign policy approach that UPSC rewards in answers. Roadmap: Strategic West Asia Policy. India's West Asia policy must transition from simple crisis management to long-term strategic hedging to secure its economic, energy, and security interests. This evolution reflects the increasing complexity of the region and the growing stakes for India. The key strategic objectives include preserving strategic autonomy by refraining from taking sides in regional conflicts and focusing on protecting national interests through balanced engagement. Expediting Chabhar and INSTC development accelerates construction at Chabhar port to secure connectivity with Central Asia and beyond. Consulate coordination strengthens consular support and emergency response networks to protect the diaspora during crisis. For mains, this roadmap demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of how middle powers can navigate complex regional dynamics while protecting their core interests. The dehyphenated approach is a model that other countries study and sometimes emulate. UPSC Integration, West Asia. Let us consolidate the West Asia topic with a prelims practice question. Consider the following pairs of ports and their locations: Chabhar Port in Iran, Duk Port in Oman, and Sabang Port in Indonesia. Which pairs are correctly matched? The answer is option C1, 2, and 3. All three ports are correctly matched with their respective countries. This question tests your knowledge of strategic ports that are relevant to India's connectivity and maritime interests. For mains, the answer framework should begin with an introduction defining the Link West policy and noting the current US-Iran armed conflict. The first body paragraph should discuss India's strategic interests, including energy security, remittances from the diaspora, and maritime routes through critical choke points. The second body paragraph should detail connectivity challenges facing Chabhar, IMEC, and instability under the shadow of regional instability. The conclusion should emphasize strategic autonomy and deploying alternative transport corridors as the way forward. My dear students, we have covered an enormous amount of ground today across these interconnected topics. Let us take a moment to consolidate the key takeaways. From Topic 1 on crude oil strategy, remember the 90% import dependency, the 40.5% Russian share, and the 41 countries in India's sourcing basket. The strategic petroleum reserves at Visakhapatnam, Mangaluru, and Padur provide critical buffers against supply disruptions. From Topic 2 on ethanol blending, remember the E20 target by 2025 to 26, the 40% carbon reduction benefit, and the food versus fuel conflict that drives the transition toward 2G and 3G biofuels. The PM Jivan Yojana supports commercial 2G ethanol production. From Topic 3 on the Hormuz crisis, remember the 21 million barrels daily that transit this critical waterway, representing 20% of global petroleum liquids. India's response combines diplomatic engagement, import diversification, and novel operations like Operation Sankalp. From Topic 4 on judicial reforms, remember the 5 crore pending cases, the 20% vacancy rate, and the structural reforms including E-Courts Phase 3, the All India Judicial Service under Article 312, and the collaborative bench bar approach to pendency reduction. From Topic 5 on West Asia policy, remember the 8.5 million diaspora, the $40 billion in annual remittances, and the dehyphenated approach that allows India to maintain balanced relationships with Iran, Israel, and the GCC simultaneously. For your revision strategy, create one-page summaries for each topic covering key facts, institutional mechanisms, and potential mains answer structures. Practice writing at least one answer weekly using the frameworks we developed today. The discipline of articulating your thoughts in writing is what transforms knowledge into examination performance. Remember, my dear aspirants, that UPSC is not looking for perfect answers. They are looking for structured thinking, clear communication, and the ability to connect dots across topics. Every topic we covered today connects to broader themes. Energy security connects to geopolitics, judicial reform connects to constitutional values, and West Asia policy connects to diaspora welfare. If this lecture helped you understand these topics better, please like the video, share it with your fellow aspirants, and subscribe to our channel for more such comprehensive sessions. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our daily current affairs analysis. Leave your questions and feedback in the comments section. I personally read them and often incorporate your suggestions into future sessions. Until we meet again in the next lecture, keep studying, keep growing, and keep believing in your potential. Jai Hind.